Hold on. Wait for it. Wait for it. All right, there we go. Welcome, everyone, to Classics 160D2, Classical Mythology, and today's wonderful lecture on Virgil's Aeneid, the great epic of the ancient Roman Empire. Let's see what we got on the docket for today. All right, we are going to start with announcements and a brief recap by yours truly. Then Darcy is going to take us through the final project and what's expected out of that. Before we get to that, I'm actually going to show you two examples, or at least excerpts of two examples, that I think really went above and beyond, right? That it's kind of even above what's expected here, but just two examples that I thought were spectacular and may give you a little bit of inspiration moving forward. Next up, we are going to have Matt talking about Virgil, the author of the Augustan Age. Katie will take us through the overview, the big picture overview of the Aeneid. Julianne is going to talk about the linkages between Virgil's Aeneid and Augustus, the first emperor of ancient Rome. And then Colin will talk about how these kind of political these forms of political propaganda actually go beyond literature, and they manifest themselves in the realm of architecture as well. And what we'll see is that Augustus really did have a very overt plan to justify himself as the first emperor of Rome. So, announcements, what do we got today? First off, go ahead and put this thing in speaker view. You can see me, you can see the words, you'll be able to see a couple video examples of these projects, so do that. If you have questions, go ahead and shoot those questions to somebody who is not talking, because I'm terrible at multitasking. And then two big things coming up. So, next week, no live classes, all right? So you can try to sign on at 11 a.m. if you want. I will not be here, the TAs will not be here. None of us are going to be here. So instead, why don't you bring up Jason and the Argonauts? It's on D2L for next week. You'll find it under Monday and Wednesday. Watch half of it and then watch the other half on Wednesday. Or watch it all on Monday. Do it however works best for you. But enjoy that movie and have some fun watching what they thought was a sweet adventure flick back in the 1960s. Final exam. The final exam is going to take place on the last day of class, which is Wednesday, December 9th. You don't need to sign into Zoom or anything like that. It's on D2L. This thing is the exact same, basically, as the midterm, right? Same number of questions, 25 multiple choice questions. Those multiple choice questions are only going to be about the second half of the course. And then there will be one essay question. And that essay question will ask you to synthesize something from kind of both halves of the course, right? So think about the big themes we've talked about, and you're going to have to synthesize content and evidence and arguments that span the entire semester. So that's where the kind of final part comes into it, all right? So again, that's going to take place December 9th, Wednesday, 11 a.m., when you would normally be in class right here, and it's just going to last the class period, so 50 minutes. It's not going to be 2 or 3 hours or anything like that. Okay, so the stories we've been talking about this week relate to the wonderful world of Roman history and Roman mythology. And what we've talked about, right, is how the earliest stages of Roman history are kind of intimately entwined with mythology. So stories like those of Romulus and Remus, those are seen as these kind of mytho-histories, right? People, for the most part, don't think that Romulus and Remus were actual people, probably. Or if they were, we know very, very little about them, and the stories probably did not take place in the way that we read them today. But nonetheless, this is kind of how later Romans looked back on their earliest stages of history, right? So in a weird way, it is a history, but it's more of a history of what later Romans thought about their early history than an accurate early history itself. We'll see more about that with the Aeneid today. And with the story of Romulus and Remus, right? We see them getting floated down the river, raised by this she-wolf here, one of the most famous statues in all of Rome. which turns out is not ancient at all. The little babies, they're Renaissance. The wolf turns out not to be Etruscan. It turns out to be medieval. But nonetheless, you go to the Capitoline museums, you look at this statue, and you're like, Romulus and Remus, what a great story. And then they eventually go back, they reinstate their grandfather as the king of Alba Longa. They depose the evil Amulius, and then they go to found their city, eventually getting into a weird conflict where Romulus kills Remus, and that's why we have Rome instead of Rheims, and it was founded on the Palatine Hill, which just happens to be the same place where we have some of the earliest evidence for habitation, earliest archaeological evidence for habitation. And we can see those in these like post holes, the little crevices here where the walls would have been. You can actually go up there and see a little sign that says the hut of Romulus. Obviously he didn't put that out there, but like that's how Rome's marketing it these days. And it's very cool that these earliest habitations do take place on the Palatine Hill, and they do date to the 8th century or the 700s BC, which just happens to coincide pretty well with the actual mythological date of, that's right, April 21st, 753 BC. You don't have to remember any dates for the class, except that one. You do have to remember April 21st, 753 BC, the mythological founding date of Rome. And then we talked about the 7 kings of Rome, right? And how they're like, you know, the later Romans really look back and envision the monarchy as this period of 7 kings, even though in reality it's very, very unlikely that there actually were 7 kings. And we saw how each of these kings contributes something to the character of the Roman people and the city of Rome. And so what we're looking at here is known as the Serbian Wall, which even though in reality archaeologists said was built hundreds of years later, to Romans, they said their early history that this was the work of Servius Tullius, the 6th king of Rome, and one of the cool things is it runs straight through the main train station in Rome today, so you can go to McDonald's and have your Big Mac, or whatever the Italian version of that is, with your table right next to one of the oldest walls in the city of Rome. Alright, so what I would like to do now is go ahead and... yeah, go ahead. Do I have one more slide here? Oh, and then we finished last time with some of the legends of the early Republic, right? Again, these kind of mytho-historical characters like good old Mucius Scaevola, right? Who attempted to assassinate the Etruscan king, held his hand into the flame, and as it burned off, he said he was one of 300 Roman assassins who had pledged their lives to kill the Etruscan king, scared the Etruscans so bad that, according to this myth, they ran off. So again, much like the kings of Rome, much like Romulus and Remus, the early heroes of the Roman Republic are kind of these maybe historical, but definitely at least somewhat mythological characters who do these great deeds, who exhibit what it means to be a great Roman. So what we're going to do now is look at a couple, at least excerpts of a couple of examples of videos that have been produced as final projects for this class and other classes that I've done before. The first one is on agriculture in the ancient Greek world, and it talks about Demeter, it talks about some of the rituals associated with Demeter, and its production values are just absolutely incredible. They're fantastic. Again, this is above and beyond what I'm expecting, but hopefully it'll inspire you to greatness. So I'm going to go ahead and put this thing on here. Let's see if I can actually figure out how to do this. All right, we go over there. We'll take me off of here. And let's play this thing.
Oh, hi there. Sorry, I didn't see you. I was just admiring these fruit. Isn't it amazing? Fruit, food, all this produce, it's just vital for our survival. But even in today's society, not necessarily just for our survival. It's a form of social interaction. But we might wonder, where does all this food come from? Where does all this stuff that makes us social, where does it all come from? Well, does it fall from the sky? No. comes from trees, farms, ranches, other forms of...
Whoops.
of agriculture. Agriculture is so vital to our society today. We use it in everything, not just for food, but also for medicine, for materials, and many other forms. But we're not the first society to know this. Today, we're going to go into an ancient civilization of ancient Greece. Welcome, my name is Chandler Brown, and this is Chatting with Chandler. Welcome back. Today, we will be talking about Greece. And I'm not just talking Greece, or Greece. I'm talking Greece, specifically in agriculture. Did you know that in ancient Greece, over 80% of the population was involved in harvesting and picking season? Now that's crazy. Compare that to the 13% of the US population that is involved in food and agriculture services today. Now if you don't believe me, let's go find out for ourselves. Come on. Wow, isn't this cool? Well, come on, let's go get to the vineyards. Wow, such beautiful orchards. Now these people, they knew how to harvest. Some of the things they harvested were things such as grains, grapes, and most importantly, olives. Delicious. Agriculture was a main source of income for the people of a festival called the Thesmophoria. The Thesmophoria. It's a 3-day festival. And festival, I mean it's a party. It's held in autumn just for women. It's a way to honor Demeter and also to worship her for good harvest. The first day is a day where the women travel up to the shrine Thesmophorian. The second day is the day of fast. It's also a day of preparation.
All right, so you guys get a sense for this here. And one of the kind of cool things is that not only is it like kind of a funny video that's really well produced, but he actually does, and if you watch this part, do a good job of talking through some of the ancient evidence for these festivals related to agriculture. So let's go ahead, we're going to look at one more. This was for a different class on the kind of legacy of Greece and Rome, and the student's talking about portraiture. So it's not as much based in mythology, but it's still a really cool idea in terms of this person who is really into art being able to rely and utilize what they're really good at while at the same time bringing in ancient evidence. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Of all the different styles and subject matters of visual art, one of the most personal and probably most diverse is portraiture. Though the exact origin of portraiture is hard to pin down, the art form is commonly seen in ancient Egypt, Greek, and Roman artifacts. Early classical Greek portraiture stems from ancient Greek styles, and the purposes portraiture served in these two societies are similar. In ancient Greece, people used portraiture primarily for religious and funerary purposes, painting or sculpting the faces of gods, but also spending lives of gods and would eat in a similar way. Egypt, generally very idealized. Even though portraits were still commonly seen in goddesses, so portraits were ideals, all of these featuring lots of different subjects, which ultimately led to the expansion of realism, as the people in sculptures were no longer just the most important political figures, war heroes, and religious figures. Some portraits were still idealized, namely those of emperors, but portraits weird. Wasn't during the medieval and ordinary settings is a more of.
All right, so. Bring me back up here. All right, so the idea with these, right, again, is these really go above and beyond what you're going to be expected to do, but hopefully they inspire some kind of cool things here. A couple things to take away with both of them, right? They have really high production values, but both of those things actually do a great job of really commenting on the ancient evidence and then bringing that into a kind of fun way of presenting it, right? So it's not just showing you can draw a cool portrait, it's doing that as well as talking about the research that you've done, right? So that's really what we're looking for, is for you to be able to present something in a cool and fun way, but also really show that you've done some serious research and that you can integrate that into an engaging final format. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Darcy, and she'll talk a little bit more about the final project and what the expectations are going to be for that. So Darcy, the stage is yours.
Hey everybody. So I mean, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea about just some of the different directions you can take with this final project. There's a ton of them, and if you have any questions about anything that I talk about right now, or anything else related to the final project, don't hesitate to hit up one of your TAs. If we could go forward to the next slide. So I just want to talk about, basically, I just printed out the final product, or the final project guidelines, and I just want to talk through some of those real quick. So the first thing, and probably one of the more important things to keep in mind, is that this is due December 4th before class. I believe that that's 2 weeks from now, so make sure that's on your radar, and you guys are working on these projects. So it's worth 10% of your grade, a pretty significant chunk. And because of that, we kind of expect that you'll put a lot of polish into this, and you'll put some time into it, and make sure that it's worthy of that 10% grade. So again, digital format, there's so many different kinds. So we've got several listed on the assignment sheet: documentary, hand-drawn video, graphic novel. Take your pick, and then beyond that, there's so many other ways that you can go as well. So as you kind of saw from the examples that Dr. Rob just showed us, we kind of want to make sure that we're integrating our research in this and showing kind of what we learned from all of the research that you did. Now, you don't necessarily have to cite specifically your sources in this. It might be a good idea at least to mention what your primary sources are, and then just show through what you're doing, how your secondary research also helped to inform this whole project. So yeah, just be clear on how your material was used or was influenced by your sources. So also your conclusion and your significance. Make sure you're answering your original question in your final project. It seems pretty simple, but it might be fairly easy to overlook. So just make sure you're integrating all of this information and explaining, how it's relevant to the ancient world, how it's relevant to the modern world, why people are interested in this topic, and just the answer that you found to this question overall. Now I want to flip to the second page of the final project assignment sheet, and let's just go over real quick the frequently asked questions. So how long does it need to be? It's really difficult to answer that question, given that there's so many different formats that you're going to be working with. It does say in here, if you're doing something like a video type thing, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, pretty polished. If you're doing something like an audio podcast, maybe 2 or 3 5-minute episodes. But like I said, it's really variable. And if you have any questions, again, just get a hold of one of your TAs. Another frequently asked question, do we need citations? Again, the answer is no. But you are integrating that information that you've already used and researched into this final project. So just make sure that that's evident. And that could be in a lot of different ways. You might just be mentioning it if it's like a video or a documentary or something. If you're doing like a drawing or something like that, make sure you include some sort of an artist statement, just something that will get all of that information down and make it clear that this is what you're working with, and this is what has inspired the final project. And then finally, how will these be graded? So again, if you look back to Cicero's 5 canons of rhetoric, inventio, dispositio, and elocutio. So we're looking for inventio, creative, original, precise, quality of your arguments. All of this is going to be encompassed in that. Dispositio, make sure it's organized, make sure everything flows together. You're using your time wisely. You've got evidence that supports your argument. So all of those things are relevant to this category. And then finally, elocutio. So your diction, your sentence variety, formality, rhetoric techniques, these are all going to be things that we're considering when we're grading. And again, if you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to contact us. So that's all I got for the final project. Let's go ahead and move forward to Matt.
All right. Hi, everybody. So we're talking about the Aeneid today, but who wrote it? Virgil. So one of the most famous poets of the Augustan era Rome. And Virgil starts out in a little town, Cisalpine Gaul, about 70 BC. And his name was Publius Virgilius Maro. Now, their family won the riches, but it was enough to give him an education. They had a farm. And but he goes to school. He was schooled probably in what is today Milan. And eventually he goes to Rome. And he's like, all right. So he wants to study rhetoric. And he starts going to the school and eventually gets sick of it. He tries one time in a law court, wasn't very good at it. It's like, I don't want to do this. So he goes to Naples and goes to the Epicurean school. It's where he meets Horace, and he really gets into the idea of poetry and philosophy. Right. So around this time, you have the wars, kind of the civil wars, the transformation from the Republic to the Empire. And some of his work kind of details that. So after the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, you have this kind of big civil war between the kind of like remnants of the Caesar faction with Octavian, Mark Antony, versus the assassination faction, which is like Brutus and Cassius. And Brutus and Cassius ended up being defeated and dying at the Battle of Philippi. And after this, they're trying, Octavian and Mark Antony are trying to settle some of their veterans. And what they do is they're taking land from different parts of Italy and settling veterans there. So one of the people who was affected by this was Virgil's family. And he attempts to fight this, and whether or not he actually does win or not, unknown. But this does inspire his first major work, the Eclogues. And throughout his life, Virgil had this kind of longing for his original kind of like upbringing. He was raised by country parents, kind of up in the north of Italy, and just he really liked this country style. So so the Eclogues is kind of bringing in this idea of this longing for this rural nature, along with the issues with being evicted. So in a lot of his works, it brings in kind of myth or theme or like rural themes with what's happening in Rome now, what the politics of Rome is. So yeah, it's basically about an Arcadian shepherd who gets kicked off his land and he's trying to fight it. And that's the basic idea around it. An interesting fact about the Eclogues is that there is a part in it that people theorize foretells the coming of Jesus Christ. Just an interesting little snippet and how people read that. So that's an interesting fact. So after the Eclogues, the Eclogues, he was helped by this guy named Gaius Cilnius Aeneid, and he was acted as his benefactor because as many aspiring artists know, it doesn't always pay the bills. So he needed a benefactor, and so the benefactor helps him, and he helped him write that, and it also helped him get close to Augustus. And he would also write after this time the Georgics, which again is rural lifestyle, but kind of dealing with the depletion of people from the various wars. Now, after this, he's pretty close to Augustus. He and Horace were kind of under the wing of Augustus. And eventually they're like, eventually Virgil wants to write this big story. He comes up with the Aeneid. We're going to go into all that later, so I will leave that to my colleagues. But so afterwards, he did not completely finish it. it did not pass through his final revisions. He ended up dying, and actually he didn't like it unfinished. He didn't like it. He told his friend, "Burn the thing. I never want to see it again. Nobody should ever read this." Augustus was like, "No," and the friend was like, "No, this is pretty good." And he ended up dying in Greece and was buried back in his villa in Naples. Later on, he would lead Dante through hell, and that's a whole nother fun story. All right, let's pass it on to the next person.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the Aeneid, and this is going to be an overview, I promise, but the Aeneid is an extremely dense set of 12 books, so there's a lot of information here, and I really do only cover a very small portion of it. So if you want to know the rest of the story, you're going to have to read it yourself, I guess. So the Aeneid, as the name implies, is the story of Aeneas, who is the son of Venus. He's a Trojan. He's from Troy, and he manages to escape that whole destruction and head out onto the open sea. This is a story that takes inspiration from both the Iliad and the Odyssey and sort of creates like this miniature version where the first half is like sort of an Odyssean wandering story, and the second half we have just this massive battle once they reach Italy. And you can even see this in the first lines of the Aeneid, which are arma virumque cano, arms and the man I sing. So arms, the Iliad, the man, Odysseus. But both of them are Aeneas here. So let's move ahead to the next slide, and we're going to get into the meat of what this story is. Okay, so books 1 through 3. If you look at the map in the top right corner here, you're going to see the path that the Trojans are taking from Troy, and this takes them a huge amount of time. By the time they reach Carthage, it's been like six years of them just wandering around, not really making any progress, having horrible experiences. The whole thing is about 10 years, just in a very Odyssey-like span of wandering where nobody can actually make it where they need to go with any sort of efficiency. So book 1, we come in with the Trojans at sea. We're already in the middle of the story. They've been sailing for a while, and they're heading to Italy to fulfill this prophecy. Because it's foretold that Aeneas's descendants are going to be the ones who will like be a great people, and that's going to be Rome. So he has to get to Italy in order for this to happen. Also, Juno is very angry the entire time. She's extremely mad because, first of all, she's still mad about the judgment of Paris. And she's also mad because Carthage is one of her favorite cities, and far, far, far in the future, Aeneas's descendants, the Romans, are going to destroy Carthage, and she's very mad that that will happen. So she convinces the winds to help her try to stop this, and they get blown from Sicily over to Carthage. Neptune doesn't like this because she's messing around in his realm, and he stops the wind from like attacking them anymore, but they're already in Carthage. They're on the coast of Africa now, and they have to deal with that. So they go and they're going to meet Queen Dido, who is already living there. And you'll notice that we start in Carthage, which is kind of at the far left here on this map. And there's a lot that happened before that, and we're going to get into that because once Aeneas meets Dido, he's going to tell her the entire backstory of how they got to this location. He tells her in book 2 all about the Trojan War, the Trojan horse, and how it came into the city. And there was a priest, Lacoon, who tried to warn everybody, but nobody believed him, and he threw a spear at the horse. And Athena, or Minerva in Roman mythology, was like, whoa, you're getting too close to the truth. And so she sends some serpents, and he gets strangled. Turns out he was right, though, and the Greeks attack, and Troy falls, and Aeneas manages to escape from this city with his son and his father, and he tried to bring his wife, too, but she, rather conveniently, as we'll find out, gets killed in some mysterious way, and her ghost is like, you gotta go, like, we don't have time for this. So he heads out. Book 3 is about all of their journeys up until Carthage, so that just entire line all around the Aegean Sea and into the Ionian. They wander all over the place. They're in the Cyclades, they're on Thrace, they're on Delos. They manage to get to Crete, and they're like, maybe this is the promised land that we're trying to reach. It wasn't. They get kicked off of there because a plague comes and it's just completely wiping out their people, so they have to go. So they abandon that city, and then they encounter a harpy. And the harpy's like, well, you're not going to get to Italy until you're so hungry, you're going to eat your tables, which turns out to just be more of a play on words. But she was right. They then eventually get to Buthrodum, which you can see in the middle, sort of upper part of Greece there. And this is where some of the other Trojans have already started building a city. So they got there and were much more efficient than Aeneas's squad. That's Andromache and one of Priam's sons. Andromache was Hector's wife, and Hector obviously got killed, if we remember that story. But they're like, yeah, we're just going to make a new life here. They leave because that's not where they're supposed to be. And Aeneas's father dies of old age somewhere in this little interim. And that's where we get into Carthage. So let's move on to the next little chunk here. All right, books 4 through 6. We come in book 4, and Aeneas and Dido have been like hanging out, getting to know each other, like a romance is blooming. They're like, maybe we can be together. Maybe this is going to be okay. And Juno and Venus are interfering in this. Juno wants Aeneas to stay in Carthage so that the Romans, don't happen. And Venus, I don't know what Venus's motivation is. She just wants to screw with people. That's just what ends up happening. So they sort of strike up a romance. It gets pretty serious. Dido's like, okay, we're basically married now. Like, this is going to be great. This is going to be good. It's not, because Jupiter's like, you guys have been here way too long now. Like, you have to go and do the whole Rome thing. Like, that needs to happen. So he sends Mercury, who's Hermes in Greek mythology, to tell Aeneas that it is time to leave. And Mercury's like, you should leave in the dead of night, because that's going to work out really well. And nobody's going to be mad about this at all. So they head out to leave, but Dido is like, whoa, where are you going? You're just gonna head out, not gonna have a conversation here. They have an argument, and Aeneas ends up leaving anyway. And Dido, in either a fit of spite or a fit of grief, ends up burning herself on a pyre. And Aeneas doesn't even know that this has happened. He's heading out book 5, and he turns and he sees the smoke, and he's like, that seems like maybe it's a bad omen, but he just continues on his way. And they end up having some funeral games, which, we've heard about funeral games before. There's some boxing, there's some race, some archery. This is for the death of Aeneas's father, which at this point was a year ago, but they've just decided to celebrate it now. Juno once again tries to stop the Trojans from getting to Italy by convincing the Trojan women that traveling just sucks and they should burn the ships so that they don't have to travel anymore. And they do that, but there's been some rain and the ships are fine. And then they just keep going. Like, that's not even a blip on the radar here. In book 6, we get our underworld journey. They meet up with a Sibyl, who is a priestess of Apollo, is also Apollo in both mythologies. And she ends up leading Aeneas through the underworld. They see Charon, they see Cerberus, they see the fates of all of the extremely wicked people. He meets Dido, who is there, and she's still mad in the underworld. He also speaks to his father and sees sort of the future of Rome, like all of his descendant emperors who are going to lead Rome into like a great future. He ends up leaving through these ivory gates, which is a little bit interesting because there are 2 gates to leave the underworld, the gate of horn and the gate of ivory. The gate of ivory is actually the gate of false dreams. So what does that mean? We don't know. Let's move on to book 7. Once we get to book 7, we've actually made it today. So astonishing, we have finally gotten to where we need to be. But there's going to be a problem here because we're going to have a war. And that's how it's going to go down. So they arrive in Italy, and this King Latinus, gets this vision. And the oracles are like, you should marry your daughter to one of the Trojans, not this person who she was promised to, who is a local leader named Turnus. Juno's like, let's cause problems. And gets the Fury Electo to come and just stir up this conflict even more. And then Aeneas's son decides to go hunting, but he kills a sacred deer, or at least wounds it. And this causes the war to break out. And then we get this huge catalog of warriors, like the catalog of ships in the Iliad. And Aeneas is like, okay, book 8, we're going to need some allies for this war. He goes to find the Tuscans, and King Evander, who is actually from Greece, is there, and he sends his son Pallas with some troops. And also Aeneas, much like Achilles, gets this really cool shield that his mom Venus has Vulcan, who's Hephaestus, make. And it has just this the future history of Rome, because it's going to happen in the future, but in the time that Virgil's writing this is already in the past. And you can see some of the details in this picture here of what is actually on this shield. So book 9, we have war preparations. Because Aeneas is away, Turnus goes and attacks the Trojan camp. And then some of the Trojans, Nisus and Euryalus, go and they attack in return. They end up dying. It's all just a huge bloodbath. And let's move on to the final 3 pieces. Like, lots of war is happening here. We have Jupiter being like, why is there a war? You guys can't interfere anymore. You're making this so much worse. The gods are all arguing. There's fighting that breaks out. Pallas, the son of King Evander, gets killed. Aeneas is mad. He starts killing everyone. And Juno manages to save Turnus by convincing Jupiter to let her get involved again. He doesn't really stick to his word there. Book 11, the Trojans are marching on the Latin city. Aeneas is splitting his army. Turnus goes to meet Aeneas, who's in the mountains, and leaves Camilla, who's this great warrior, in charge of defending the city. She has a really interesting backstory. Her father had to flee this city and get over a river. He tied her to a spear and threw her across. Anyway, she's real tight with Diana. And so she cuts a swath through the army. But one of the Trojan allies kills her because she's distracted with killing a bunch of other people with this javelin. But unfortunately for Aruns, he doesn't get to celebrate very long because Diana's like, absolutely not. You can't, no. And so she sends one of her other attendants to just immediately take him out with an arrow. And then finally we get to book 12, which is just the everything that this has been leading up to, the duel between Turnus and Aeneas. And they fight, and it's all very dramatic. And Juno's like, no, this is terrible. But Aeneas ends up defeating him because he's a much better fighter. And Turnus begs for his life. He's like, please spare me. You've won. I agree to give up. And Aeneas is considering this, but then he sees the belt of Pallas that has been taken from his body by Turnus when he killed him. And he kills him. And then that's the end. It ends right there. So yeah, let's move on to the politics of this, or I guess the attendance quiz. Do that. The color today is yellow.
Okay, so once again, the color is yellow, but for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and move along. Last chance, submit yellow. Now we're going to talk about Virgil and Augustus. And this is Octavian Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, as in the Julius Caesar who crossed the Rubicon and was stabbed in the Senate, Brutus, all of that kind of stuff. And so as he was the first emperor of Rome, you'll see that he does have a lot of propagandistic aspects, both literary with the Aeneid and, as Colin will talk about, physical with architecture, kind of reaffirming his authority as an emperor. And of course, he didn't call himself emperor at first. He was the princeps, the first among equals. So he may have commissioned Virgil inadvertently. Again, the color was yellow. I just got a message, yellow. So he may have commissioned Virgil, and inadvertently it's a little bit murky. Even if he didn't explicitly commission Virgil to write this, he definitely had his influence over Virgil as someone who did have a significant amount of power. And as Matt already said, there was a relationship between Virgil and Augustus when Virgil wrote his Aeneid. Augustus is a significant figure in the Aeneid, even though he isn't an actual character in the Aeneid. You'll see him throughout the text. There have been some people who believe that Augustus is kind of represented in the character of Aeneas himself. And we can kind of talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. So the Aeneid is really tied into the politics. And so when people think that Augustus may be represented in Aeneas, that the fall of Troy could be symbolic of the fall of the Roman Republic, and that then the rise of Rome is the rise of the Roman Empire. But the Aeneid quickly became a national epic. Again, Matt kind of touched on this. And it is very much Augustan propaganda. You have a lot of stuff going on with this. We'll just kind of talk about some of the most important ones. So like I said, the fall of Troy, fall of Roman Republic, and establishes that. This follows a period of long internal strife, a bunch of civil wars. Julius Caesar fought civil wars before him. You have Marius and Sulla, and you just have a long period of civil wars leading up to this. Augustus himself fought in civil wars, but he brought about a period of peace, which is again made sweeter by the end of long civil wars. And so this also establishes divine lineage for Augustus. So Aeneas's son Iulus, who becomes known as Ascanius, founds Alba Longa, and so then the family from which Romulus and Remus came, but Iulus gives us the cognomen Julius, as in Julius Caesar, who again was Augustus's adopted father. So you have, they're able to trace their lineage back up through Venus, and also to Mars through Romulus and Remus. So it kind of gives them the divine authority. They have this divine lineage. Also, you have, Katie kind of mentioned it, the shield of Aeneas when it does depict Augustus's victory at the Battle of Actium. So again, divine auctoritas, this is what the gods had planned, was for Augustus to win the civil wars and to lead Rome. So this could also be read as a sort of critique of empire. Again, scholars, of course, have provided different interpretations of it. It is more commonly seen as propagandistic, very positive for Augustus, again, establishing his divine lineage and his divine right to rule. But Virgil also talks about these patterns that you get into that can be very dangerous. And of course, Augustus is following in the pattern of civil war. And at this point, it is still kind of to be seen yet. Yes, Augustus has established this period of peace, but will it last? How long will it last? Is this falling into that pattern again? And again, Caesar was the one who kind of played into these periods of civil war in order to establish more power. So there have been some scholars who have read it as that. But I'll go ahead and pass it off to Colin. He'll talk more about this as it's seen in the physical aspects.
All right. So before we talk about Augustus and how he crafts his architecture, a brief reference is to think about the Washington, D.C. Mall, and that it is loaded with monuments and architecture that is meant to symbolize the heart of America and what we represent as a country. And Augustus is doing something similar in the Roman Forum. Next slide, please. The Roman Forum, as we see it today, is this 2.5 millennium morass of artifacts and jumble. And so it's really hard to discern what is going on, but Augustus does have a plan in what he's thinking about doing. Next slide. So Augustus is this master propagandist, and as Katie and Julianne explained with the Aeneid, is a part of his propaganda campaign to make people legitimize his ruling. He is literally creating the idea of the Roman Empire and the idea of Rome itself. And his city must be grand and must be fantastic. So we're going to talk about 3 monuments really quickly called the Forum of Augustus, the Areopagus, the Altarpiece, and the Mausoleum of Augustus. He does this all under the guise of SPQR, or Senatus Populusque Romanus, or the Senate and the people of Rome, when really it's just one guy ruling. All right, next slide. So we have the Roman Forum right here, and then Augustus decides to build behind the top arrow his Roman Forum to expand out. Next slide. So what his Roman Forum is legitimization of his power and rule, and he's really interested in consolidating this, and he does this through this massive architectural program where he's getting influence from Hellenistic Greece, architecture right now, and he incorporates ideas from the Aeneid and the Rome's mythical past to legitimize this rule. Next slide. So as we can see on our architectural schema, when you were first entering the Forum, you would immediately see this colossal statue of Augustus. And on the wings there, the curved wings there, we have these statues or niches with little placards of what these people did. So on the left, you have Aeneas and what he did. On the right, you have Romulus and what he did, as well as flanked by these great men or people of Rome. And then at the center, you have the main temple complex, which was dedicated to Mars the Avenger, because Augustus avenged the killing of Julius Caesar. Pretty apt name. But this ties back into the Aeneid, where Augustus is literally placing himself in the middle of Romulus and Aeneas as the mythical founders of Rome, creating a new Rome. Next slide. Here's the form as it exists today. Next slide. And a close-up view of the temple. Next slide. All right, so here we have the altar, the altarpiece, the altarpiece, which is this massive propaganda campaign. Again, using the images of Romulus and Remus, being dedicated at such a religious site. Next slide, please. All right, so we have an overview of the altarpiece. Next slide. So we can see that it was, once back in the day, it was not just white, but it was extremely colored and beautiful. And the altar was commissioned after a battle in Spain and Gaul, to institute what we know is known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. But it's only peaceful because the Romans are in control and over the Mediterranean. Next slide. All right, and lastly, we're finishing up with the mausoleum of Augustus. Augustus wasn't even the emperor yet when he had this commissioned. So he made this mausoleum to be the resting place for not only himself, but the Julio-Claudian family, where anyone who was associated with him, whether that was through blood or if you just happened to be in the emperor's circle, you would be buried here, and thus you would have this perpetual glory for eternity. Next slide. And you can go to the last one, Matt. And finally, the last thing he does is he talks about his res gestae, or his CV, of all the wonderful, fabulous things that he did, claiming that the Roman people gave him all these wonderful awards and the power, but really, he took it all. And you can see this replicated res gestae on the Areopagus Museum. All right, with that, we are out of time, and we're going back to Dr. Stefan.
All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed today's class. This was the last day that you have a reading response due, so congratulations on finishing those up. Have an awesome weekend and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Take a little bit of a break. Start thinking a little bit about those final projects. And I will see you a week from Monday for our last final week of class. All right. See you, everyone.